Let me ask you one question here.
Yeah.
Are there initiatives that the United States could have undertaken, either diplomatically or otherwise, that you personally wanted to see us undertake and that we did not?
I'll tell you, I'm sure I could think of one if you gave me enough time, but I first became involved in this issue in August of 2002, after Jack Danforth had been appointed Special Envoy. And I've been working this issue very hard, and I'll tell you, it has been a full-court press. When we talk about conflicting foreign policy priorities, I will tell you, Sudan is one of the top several issues that the administration has been pursuing. And I think one reason, and on the China point, it's an absolutely important point, we have had a very intense discussion with the Chinese, and we will with the President when he arrives, on Sudan. And I think one of the reasons we've seen the Chinese be somewhat responsive, we're not there yet, is because we've done such an effective job at mobilizing this multilateral pressure on the Sudanese government.
Why aren't they more responsive? You just said they've been somewhat responsive. What's your analysis of why the Chinese aren't more responsive?
Well, we haven't fully tested the proposition. I think when we go to the Security Council for a UN Security Council resolution to endorse peacekeeping, that will probably be the most significant test.
Do you think the Chinese are acting out of economic self-interest here?
Well, I think they're acting out of economic self-interest in terms of their relationship with Khartoum. They do have oil interests there, and of course there are natural resource questions. But I think that by the same token, cooperation to end the violence in Darfur is something that's in their national interest. They want to be seen as a responsible global partner. And we've made this a significant issue in the senior level dialogue the Deputy Secretary has.
Very quickly.
Ambassadors mentioned Jack Danforth's role, and that's how I got first involved in Sudan as well, because he represented Missouri, and I was working for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch at the time. And that's one thing we're not doing quite the same way now. I mean, and I think one reason I was able to go back to Sudan and get in with the African Union was because both sides, the Sudan government as well as the Southerners who came into the government of national unity, they had so much respect for Jack Danforth. And Danforth spent 2 or 3 years essentially knocking heads there and just working at it, very pragmatic. And I think we've kind of gone off in a different direction since we were putting pressure on the United Nations, or we're talking about NATO, we're talking about things on the outside, and we don't have somebody of Danforth's stature who is out, there day in and day out.
We have a powerful forum right here. Is there anybody whose name you'd like to place into nomination to replace him?
I mean, Danforth himself, you can come back. I mean, people have talked about Colin Powell. I'm not so sure. It has to be somebody who has a lot of visibility.
Who are some of the other names that have been mentioned besides Powell? Anybody else that comes to mind?
Clinton.
Bill Clinton.
Yeah, Bill Clinton would be.
Yeah, I mean, to this day, there's not a single member of his administration that he apparently interacts with without saying, how do we allow the Rwanda genocide? How did it? I still don't get it. How do we let that happen? It just doesn't make any sense. He can't wrap his mind around it. But instead of having that conversation, obviously it would be politically very difficult for President Bush to enlist him, but Kofi Annan in his final term could potentially enlist him as a UN envoy, which would be a little, as he did for the tsunami relief. I mean, he is somebody who's got a vested self-interest and a true capacity to make people see commonality that they didn't see.
Also, it gets to Madawi's point also about the need for dialogue. You need somebody there. I mean, I spent a day with a tribal reconciliation conference in south of Nyala, and this was a grassroots effort, great family organization, and that particular one didn't succeed. But there is a great desire to find that space, and I think that we need to have somebody who is over there. I mean, and I think Clinton's a wonderful idea, somebody that has that kind of stature.
You need an envoy to give protection for the process itself. Somebody who can, stand in front of the Sudanese government to allow this kind of grassroots.
But it wouldn't the Sudanese government paint any U.S. envoy as a representative of imperialism, as someone who's here's the U.S. and here in the person of Bill Clinton or whomever, and try and paint that person as they are going to try for regime change and so forth?
If he's appointed by the UN, then we can cut this short. A UN envoy, he's an American, but he's a UN envoy.
Of course, it also bears saying that the appointment of Bill Clinton as a prospective envoy to Sudan would not be without its own domestic political consequences here in the United States, especially as we head into a midterm election.